Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second Brad Trost Electronic Town Hall. I'm Mike Patton, and what we're going to do this evening, I'm going to bring Brad on in a moment, and we're going to open the floor to questions. Brad's going to do a bit of an introduction. But if you, watching at home, have questions, you're more than welcome to participate. Send your questions to Ask Brad at bradtrostcampaign.com, and those questions will relay through to me, and we're going to be asking. We've got people in the audience here, and we've got questions from Facebook, and we're looking for questions online. So we'll be taking a combination of those questions as we go along. So it's just past the top of the hour now, and we're looking to go for a little more than an hour, and that's the plan. So as I said, I'm Mike Patton, and what I'd like to do is introduce our leadership candidate, my personal friend and a great guy, Mr. Brad Trost. And thank you for taking your BlackBerry out of your pocket, because that can be a distraction. So, Brad, tell the folks a little bit about yourself and do a bit of an introduction.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you to everyone who's here, and again, to all my friends back home. For the people who are here, I have to be careful I don't wander too far, and they're going to start to give me signals when I start to wander out of camera shot. So if I seem a little bit weird in the way I'm moving, you know someone's waving hands there at the back to tell me to go left or go right or to do something. I have to say, I'm really glad to be with people at home tonight and to be here with you. But I have to say, I would rather be with two other very important people in my life. And that's one of the things you need to know about me. As much as I love being involved in politics and talking about things I care about and my country and what Canada means to me, to know who Brad Trost is, you first of all have to understand I'm a dad to a beautiful little brown-eyed 2-year-old girl named Isabel who throws temper tantrums, isn't quite potty trained yet, and absolutely adores her dad. And then I'm married to a wonderful girl whose name is Gerald, which is the anglicized version of Gerolstod, which, again, not the most common name. But my wife is one of those literally millions and millions of new Canadians. She came here in 2003. Came here to do her master's degree. She had a scholarship at the University of Saskatchewan. And she's one of my inspirations for running in this campaign. I actually said I may be the only candidate in this race whose spouse actually wanted him to run more than the candidate wanted to run. But to understand that, you have to understand my wife grew up behind the Iron Curtain. She's Mongolian by birth. She grew up in a country where the communists actually ran the country. There was a one-party rule, and she remembers the bread lines. She remembers how difficult it was. And when she came to Canada, it was an amazing experience. She loves this country more deeply. It's something, I actually really got to meet her and the courage to start thinking about dating her at a Canada Day thing months after I'd originally met her. And she's passionate. Because growing up in a communist country, a country where she did not have freedom, she understood what it means. She watched her mom participate in the pro-democracy movements. She watched the country evolve. She watched the economic crisis they had there, where there was starvation, where there was problems. She watched the first elections, and she got involved. She went and she volunteered and eventually ended up the staffer of a member of parliament in Mongolia, one of the few women parliamentarians in Mongolia. Now, this lady was a brave lady. She had taken over the seat of her older brother, a gentleman who had led the pro-democracy movement in Mongolia and had achieved so much that the country was asking him to be prime minister. But the night before he was to become prime minister, he was stabbed to death in his apartment, killed. Because of what he believed, because of what he gave, because of what he desired for his country. And to this day, they do not know who or why that killed him. There's speculation it was corrupt members of his own party, it was no one has any idea. But this is where she comes from. She understands how much Canada means to her, how great it is in a country that has had 150 years of democracy, what the prosperity is, what the opportunities are, what it is like to be Canadian. She very much loved her homeland, but she chose Canada because Canada has been a gift to the world. We are a country which has brought in people from everywhere. And if I need someone to remind me to get up there and fight for the best country in the world, she's the one. And so that's why I'm saying, as much as I'm very happy to see each and every one of you here today, I miss my two brown-eyed girls. And that's the first thing you have to understand. Now, for those of you who are tuning in who haven't followed this very much, I'm Brad Trost, Member of Parliament, first elected in Saskatchewan way back in the year 2004. Been re-elected. I've actually lost count since the number of times. People ask, what's your occupation? I'm a geophysicist. They say, what's that? It's sort of like a geologist, except we prefer to use computers and math instead of pencil crayons and maps when we try to figure something out underneath the ground. But I also identify as a farm kid from rural Saskatchewan. My grandparents and my great-grandparents were born in the Ukraine and Russia, German-speaking Mennonites and sort of Lutheran Germans who immigrated here in the 1880s through the 1920s. My one grandma, who passed away 2 years ago, coming just shy of 99, she remembers the Civil War in Ukraine, fought between the Red Army and the White Army. And she passed on to me that it's important to be involved in politics in your country. So who am I? I'm a guy who's partially a new Canadian family. I'm someone who's an old Canadian family. I'm a Western Canadian, but I'm also someone who's very comfortable out here campaigning in Toronto, someplace where I feel very much at home. So after getting elected in 2004, I've served on the Natural Resources Committee, the Industry Trade Committee, and the International Trade Committee. And if you ask someone who knew me in Ottawa before this campaign got started, what's Brad Trost best known for? They would have said, you know, he's a bit of a geeky guy who's best known for things like energy policy, mining policy, and you know he was involved in things like the Canada-Colombia Free Trade Agreement. He's done a bit of everything. He's the party's critic for Canada-U.S. relations. He has foreign policy experience, a bit of everything. Well-rounded guy. But if you'd ask someone sort of nationally what I'd be known for, they'd say, Brad Trost. He's that social conservative member of Parliament from Saskatchewan who says what he thinks and tells it from the heart. And you know what? Both groups of people would actually be right. So let me tell you, both to the people at home and so forth, who I am, what I stand for, and then we will take some questions both from the audience here. I know we've got several questions at least from email, and more are probably to come in. So let me do a few minutes here talk, and then we'll start the questions. I'll be real quick about this. So who is Brad Trost? What does he stand for? And what are the principles? 3 basic principles define me. I am a fiscal conservative. I stand for free enterprise, for low government spending in the economy, because we actually need to make sure that your money stays with you. It's not the government's money starting and then we give it back to the people. It's yours. It brings greater prosperity. It brings greater freedom. So when I talk about what I want to do in my first couple years as Prime Minister, one of the first things I always say is I want to make sure every Canadian has a tax cut the first 2 years going forward. It's not just economically important, it's symbolically important that every Canadian get involved in that process too, because we're all in this together. We all need to share part of the freedom and prosperity that low taxes make. This is why I'm opposed to things like a carbon tax. For those of you who are here, those of you who are watching need to also remember this. Environmental carbon taxes in Ontario have driven your electricity rates through the roof. I met the lady in Peterborough who's paying $1,000 a month in electricity. I don't want that to happen to the rest of the country, what's happened here. So I'm a fiscal conservative. Jim Flaherty would ask me for advice, and I said, look, we balance the budget, we cut taxes. Those are the 2 basic things we look at. Yes, we need to invest in basic things, but the government should try to concentrate on the things it does well and not try to be everything to all people. Then the second thing people will always know about me, and this is the one thing that they know Brad Trost everywhere. Brad Trost is a social conservative. The family is the fundamental building block of society. And our job as politicians, as members of the government, is to protect the weakest, to build the family, to do what we can, because that's what we're supposed to do. Protect life, protect freedom, protect property. And by protecting the weakest, that means the unborn, protecting the most elderly and most frail, people who are being pushed and encouraged. Instead of getting good palliative care, they're being pushed to end their lives early. We as social conservatives can actually show the way to a more compassionate society. If you look at a society, what is the biggest problem? What causes financial problems? What causes chaos in the society? It's when the family unit breaks down. So it doesn't matter where or what, we need to have policies to support the family. Ultimately, good families are built not because of the government, but because of other things in society. But government can harm the family, and instead, we should have policies that support the family. And I've been very clear on all my policies. I'm socially conservative. I believe the family should be protected. That means protecting people from conception to natural death as far as their right to life. That means doing things to make sure that a mom and a dad are considered the two most honored positions in society. And finally, I'm a democratic conservative. What that means is I understand I can't force people to accept everything I believe. I have to bring people along, and I understand one very important thing. Politics is about communication, and that means it's about listening more than actually about telling people what to do. Our party has been really good at raising funds, asking people for money. But you know what? It would be a great idea if we actually had referendums, plebiscites on important issues to our membership. We need to look for ways to engage Canadians all across the board to be able to give their opinions back to the government. This is one thing that needs to be understood. In our system, the Prime Minister is not the President. He's not the dictator. He's not the king. We have a queen. She fulfills a ceremonial role. He's the First Minister, the first servant, someone who's there to listen and bring his team alongside. If you were watching last night, the debates, I said some very nice things about some of my colleagues, Steve Blaney, Lisa Raitt. I complimented them. Doesn't mean I agree with them on everything, but I pointed out the good things that they provide to our conservative team. And that is what I mean when I talk about being a democratic conservative. So, the basic principles of Brad Trost: fiscally conservative, supports lower taxes, supports for limited government spending, for the priorities, not for everything, everywhere. A social conservative, someone who puts the family first, and a democratic conservative, someone who understands we don't force people to accept everything we believe. We bring them along by showing them a better way and convincing them. So, I said it's better to listen than to talk, and that's part of communication. So, Mike, we're going to start to go to questions. So I don't know if you want to start with the audience. Everyone was so well behaved because they know there are cameras are in the background, or if we want to start with the online stuff.
Well, let's start with an email question. And just for our email questioners, a couple of comments. Thank you very much. There's all sorts of emails coming in with questions, and that's askbrad@bradtrostcampaign.com. Please continue with the questions. But the important thing to remember is no big long preamble. I'm only going to get a couple seconds to look at it. So if it's a big long fancy question, I'm just going to go on to the next one. So just bear that in mind. So Brad, first question is from Steve. Brad, I'm a strong fiscal conservative and looking for fresh new ideas. I was supporting Kevin O'Leary up until yesterday, and now I'm looking for a new candidate. Could you please outline your significant fiscal plans for Canada?
Good.
Thank you. That's from email, one of the email questions.
So, to this gentleman out there and to everyone that's watching, my basic principles, when people ask, what is the first thing that you can do as Prime Minister to help build the economy? First thing I say, the first priority in my fiscal policy is a comprehensive overhaul on the tax code to make it simplified, We wouldn't get rid of all deductions, of course not, but to simplify it and begin to lowering rates with the rock-solid, ironclad guarantee for the first 2 years of my government, we would target income tax cuts for everyone. That would be a basic priority number one. So lower brackets, less deductions, more simple, because that actually creates more economic growth. It's a supply-side argument. Now, I do that with income tax. I'd also do the same thing with business tax. My business tax ideas, some of them are borrowed from Jack Mintz, the economist, who said if you just got rid of loopholes, you can start to lower the corporate tax rate a few percent. Now, offhand, I'm trying to remember what percent we were targeting. I think it was 9 or 10% by simplifying the corporate tax rate. That actually brings a boost to the economy. And after yesterday's proposals by the Trump administration, we're going to need to compete, because what was presented, if it goes through the U.S. economy, will give the Americans a 4-point reduction advantage over the Canadian economy. And that will move billions of dollars of Canadian investment south. So we need to be able to compete. The other thing I've argued for is elimination of the capital gains tax. People are going to go, whoa, 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 whoa. Doesn't that just help the rich people? One, economics shows that if you eliminate this tax, the government doesn't lose any revenue. So it doesn't take any money out of everyone else's pockets. We have that in Canadian history from before. The second thing is this. Why don't we just cut some of those business direct subsidies and then let business people who sell their businesses or other people instead not pay it? Federal government collects about $3 billion. Some people have said that'll cause problems in the Toronto housing market. It actually won't. Because here's something people forget. A lot of people want to sell their properties here, but are scared to because they'll pay big capital gains tax and they pay the transfer tax. So we take that out, you will have a lot more supply put on the market in the Toronto housing market and Vancouver as well. So that's what my underlying fiscal policy would be, and along with a few other things, go to my website. We're aiming to up GDP growth significantly.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, I want to go to, in a second, to a Facebook question, but does anybody here have a question that they would like to ask? Ma'am, just stay, I'll come to you. That's fine.
So, first of all, before I ask a question, I just want to let you know we prepare some coffee, which is decaf coffee. I feel it's more healthy than your Coke. So feel free to.
That's actually,
yourself.
yeah, I was actually waving for water back there, and they gave me decaf Coke, so thank you very much. So.
Just feel free, and you, everybody, to have some coffee and donuts. My question is, I know you're originally. Oh, sorry. My question is, I know you're originally from Saskatchewan, and I'm not sure how many years experience you have in Toronto, Ontario area, but I personally think the environment in Toronto or Ontario will be different with Saskatchewan in culture, business, structure, society. Everything can be different. So my question to you is, to get successful for your campaign, I believe to win as much as possible, as much as support from Ontario will be very important for you. How you do you have some special structure or strategy to deal with Ontario?
Let me answer this. People sometimes say, what does Brad mean when he says, I'm the guy from rural Saskatchewan and my family looks like it's from Toronto? Okay? Look around the room here for the people. Back home they can't see. You know, I was at an event in Calgary where it was the big debate we had. 98 to 99% of the room full of conservatives were Caucasian. Okay? I have news for you. Calgary's not that white. Rural Saskatchewan? Yeah, pretty much. Look around. Majority of the people in this room here tonight are visible minorities. Okay? The Conservative Party holds only 2 seats out of 33 where visible minorities are the majority in the country. Okay? Ontario is becoming a lot of visible minorities. Look, rural Saskatchewan, rural Ontario, same sort of culture. Been there, done it. I'm a farm boy, understand it. But I also feel very comfortable in a very multicultural Canada. Some of you have been on WeChat. I have a Chinese sister-in-law. My older brother used to teach university in Beijing, China, taught Canadian history there this summer. Okay? One of my volunteers here in the audience, she got in trouble because my wife spoke better Korean to her mom than she did. I feel very sorry for her. Okay? My Colombian sister-in-law down in Lethbridge the other day, she was telling me she thought I could win this thing and keep going for it. So here's the one thing I bring to this leadership race for Toronto, for Montreal, for Vancouver, that other candidates don't. I understand small-town rural Canada, but I also live the new Canadian experience via my wife, via my mother-in-law, and yes, if you think it's one thing to marry in, wait till your mother-in-law comes and lives with you. I love her, and you know what? Best thing, because she's still working on her English right now. She doesn't have Canadian citizenship. So that's a way I can relate. And when we talk about getting all the presents together to go back to the family back home, and the relatives and the uncles and the aunties, and they all have their shopping list, because you don't have all those goods back in Asia that we have here in Canada, even if they're made in Asia. I understand that. So that's how I can relate to places like Toronto in a way that candidates who are, how shall we say, just purely from the rural areas don't. I've got a foot in both New Canada and Old Canada because of my life experience.
Okay, Brad, thank you very much for that. That was a great question, by the way. I have one from Facebook. This is, trying to do this one-handed is very difficult. Brad, okay, here it is. I read all of Brad's issues and agree with all of them. However, Brad does not mention property rights. There are only 13% of properties across Canada that are privately owned, and it has been taken away bit by provincial, municipal, and federal laws. Not only that non-governmental agencies like MOE and SPCA have police authority to come onto your property, there is more. But I'd like to know if what Mr. Trost's stance is on private property rights. So that's Colette. Colette, ask that question.
Colette, you should be from Saskatchewan. That's a really good question. I'm a very strong supporter of property rights. One of the other candidates had a proposal, which I've heard before. In fact, it was originated by a friend of mine who lives in Saskatoon, about how we get property rights in the Constitution. You do it with the federal government and the provincial government passing individual declarations. So you don't get it for the whole country, because to change the Constitution, you need to have, the 7 provinces, and that gets to be messy. But province by province could put property rights into their constitution. So, farm kid, my dad farmed. I understand what it's like when the government does things. A lot of this is about the government abusing their rights. We need to strengthen the legal mechanisms to protect people's private properties. Because, and Preston Manning tells this old story. He once went, when he was talking about bringing this issue forward, he talked to a bureaucrat and he said, if we put property rights in, and explained how to do it, the Alberta and federal government could make an agreement. The bureaucrat said, yeah, but then when we try to buy the property after depreciating it, we'd actually have to pay fair market price. And Preston Manning said, yes, that's actually the idea with property rights. You protect people from getting ripped off by the government. But the bureaucracy is not always fond of it, but it's a great idea. It's been proposed for years. It was actually part of the debate in the 82 Constitution reform, and it's something I support.
Great, and I've got the email questions. Thank you very much for all of you sending in questions by email. We're getting a number. Anybody else have a question in the room before I go back? Ma'am, let's go to you for a question. Speak loudly into the microphone. I've already been told on that.
I will try. Is that all right? Okay. You talk about being a social conservative and concerned about family and protecting family. And so I'd just like to know how you, as a Prime Minister, would see that the rights of the unborn, preborn child would be protected more than they're protected now in this nation, and whether you would do anything legislatively around that, or what policies you would bring in.
Thank you for that very good question. You're absolutely right. I'm known to be one of the 2 strongly pro-life candidates in this race, and depending who defines it, some people say there's only 2 pro-life candidates, period, in this race. Here's what I've said to people. I understand there's situations in a minority government, a majority government, and a majority government with a big margin, things you could do. So let's say I have a minority government, can't even get the majority of my legislation through Parliament. In a minority government, here are some things I would do, because I don't have the votes to get everything done. my health minister would get a mandate letter saying, he or she, here's some things you need to do to promote pro-life by bringing people on side and encouraging people to choose life. And you're going to get promoted or demoted, and it's going to be one of the criteria. So make Canada the best country in the world for adoption. Do things to educate people and encourage the protection of unborn children who have Down syndrome and things like that. So eliminate overseas funding for abortion. So those sort of things would be put in there. That's just in a minority Conservative government. In a majority Conservative government, there are two things in our party's platform that's been voted on by our convention that I could introduce, and since it's party policy, all the members of the Conservative caucus would have either signed off or stated why they wouldn't support it even before running, because they would have to note if they disagree with anything in our party's platform. Those two things are legislative and steps against gender selection abortion and the Unborn Victims of Violence Act. So those two things I could implement with the full backing of the entire Conservative Party right away. So even if I had a one-seat majority, I could get that through. Now, I understand there's free votes, and not every Conservative agrees with me on the pro-life. So that I would need to have a much bigger majority on. But we'd get creative about seeing ways that we could actually build support. And one of my members, we'd put forward some form of private members legislation to see what to gauge for support. I'd support that. Don't know if that could actually clear the House, but there'd be some sort of effort to try. So, if I have a minority government, I have a plan. If I have a majority government, I will add things to it. If I have a really big majority government, then we'll see. Because I want to get what I can done, but I also want to let people know that I'm realistic and I'm not just promising something I can't deliver. Because I am tired of a lot of symbolism without actually any accomplishments. I believe this in my heart and hearts, and I want to convince other Canadians to come and support me. You get farther with honey than vinegar. But I have no problem putting forward legislation to the House that I think can pass.
Great, another great question. and folks, keep the questions coming in by email. We're still receiving a lot, but we have time for a few more. Ask Brad at bradtrostcampaign.com. And so we have lots of questions. If we get to the end of the online version and you folks still have questions, we'll make sure Brad will stay as long as necessary to answer your questions. But I want to get to some of the online questions. An email from Vicky. Brad, most of my family works in softwood lumber or works for suppliers who work for softwood lumber companies. Every few years, the United States puts up trade barriers and many of my family members are laid off until we reach a new softwood lumber deal, at which point everyone goes back to work. When are you going to solve the softwood lumber, or how are you going to solve, the softwood lumber problem once and for all?
Boy, this brings me back to the first days when we were elected as Conservative government in 2006. At that time, we had the same issue, and I think it took, 4 or 5 months, 3 months, something like that, and with the Conservative government, the issue got solved. It wasn't a perfect agreement, but it actually got the lumber flowing again through most of the country. Look, first of all, you have to understand the American political system. You cannot worry about being nice with the United States when you negotiate with them. They may be our best friends, but they will rip us off, beat us on a business deal, and do what it is. Nothing personal. They're just trying to make a few bucks. So, number one, when you go up against the Americans on this, you find their political pressure points. You do not go after all of the United States. You're prepared to negotiate with them, but you target key constituencies, key House of Representative guys, on things that you can actually put political pressure on them. Call it a trade war or whatever. It's not really. It's just some very small areas. Because here is the thing. Most Americans are actually penalized by tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber. It costs about $1,000 per house more because of what they've done. So the U.S. Construction Association is on our side. Developers on our side. I have a retired congressman friend who was always on our side in the U.S. So there's a lot of American political support. So don't be shy about it. You have to put some pain to some American politicians in some places. Okay? That's number one. Number two, what you actually do is you've got to understand you're never going to get a perfect deal. It's just the way it is. The American political system is a lot about who can give donations, and the big lumber timber lobby down there are very good at it. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Okay? That we have to do. Atlantic Canada should get total exemption, parts of Quebec, because of the special circumstances, and even the Americans admit that. We will win this in the courts, but by that time it's too late. So they offer a deal, we negotiate, and we continue to up the pressure points on them because they want a deal as much as we do because of their home builders. So my strategy, negotiate hard, go after their political vulnerabilities, not through the whole country, that just makes enemies, but in a few places, and be willing to strike some sort of an agreement. And again, unfortunately, you try not to negotiate in public. So if Donald Trump's watching, ignore what I just said.
And Brad, I'm sure Donald Trump is sitting in the Oval Office right now, just tuned in. So, Facebook question. Facebook question? Oh, and I lost it. Here we go. Brad, now I don't care if you believe in man-made climate change, but how can I trust you with our, how can I trust that you will protect our air, water, and natural resources from exploitation and development? And that's Trent.
Good question, Trent. This is one of the realities about environmental policy. It's climate change, climate change, climate change, climate change, climate change, to the point that we forget about other environmental priorities. With Parliament, I'm in Ottawa frequently. I only found this out this year. They apparently still pour millions of gallons of liters of raw sewage into the rivers around Ottawa. Great for you guys who live in Ottawa. I mean, there was a big uproar when they did that into the St. Lawrence in Montreal. Victoria Harbour, you know, green Victoria, the environmental friendly portion of Canada, they do that, and the raw sewage causes a mess in the United States. We have abandoned oil wells in southern Saskatchewan. We have little environmental issues all across the country that are not being dealt with. So here's the thing. Environmental expenditures need to be targeted at real, local, small projects. We still have reserves across this country with drinking water issues. Why are we planning on spending $2.5 billion on climate change, sending money overseas? So this is my priority, okay? One of the other candidates was talking about Canada First economic policy. We need to put that also in our environmental policy. Canada has unmet local environmental issues, and we're spending money on other places in the world. I love other countries when I go there, but I'm not sending them our money, not until we stop putting raw sewage into our rivers, not until we have our abandoned oil well issue in Western Canada taken care of, and not till we have good, safe drinking water for all Canadians. So, safe air for Canadians, safe water for Canadians, and safe land for Canadians. A Canada-centric environmental policy, that's what we need.
Okay, so back to email. I have an email question from Murray. I am a proud outdoorsman, hunter, angler, and gun owner. I was pleased with many of the changes that the Conservative government made to laws around gun ownership, but I was disappointed that all the aspects of C-68 were not repealed by the Conservative government. Will you repeal the additional elements of C-68 that are still on the books? That's from Murray.
Simple, yes. That's what the Conservative Party promised to do in 2004, and for the life of me, I don't know why we watered down our commitments in 2006. The system we had for enforcing gun control registration worked better prior to C-68, the Allen Rock legislation. This is one thing that people need to know and understand. Now, for those of you here in Toronto, most people in Canada who use guns, and there's a lot in Toronto, I know that, but who use it, they're hunters, they're fishermen, they're people who hunt for ducks. When I used to work in the Northern Territories, very tragic story. One of the guys who worked with me, Inuit, his auntie was actually killed by a polar bear. So these are tools that people need. And they tended to be rifles and shotguns, which criminals don't use because they're just so bulky. and our laws still harass people who use them all the time. So among one of the things I've said, we're going to go back to the old system, which worked, because it understood a criminal with a pocket weapon is a completely different thing that needs to be looked at differently than a farmer like me or a hunter. And for the record, 12-gauge Remington and a .270 Savage. Those are the two hunting rifles that I own.
Okay, where are we here? Let's, another one from Facebook. Brad, what is your opinion on supply management? That would be much appreciated, Marty. Thank you, Marty, for a very brief and to the point question. I appreciate that. What's supply management?
I don't know how many people were watching the debate last night, but the word supply management, not the first time, and I have a feeling most Canadians are thinking, what in the world is supply management? If you don't come from a rural area, you've heard this term back and forth. Let me simplify it. There's 5 basic commodities, of which dairy is the biggest, and then there's some poultry commodities, turkeys, chickens, eggs, etc., that the government regulates how much production you can have and prices and things, and blocks imports from coming in through tariffs. Okay, that's called supply management. There's a different term in Quebec in French for it, but that's the basic thing, and it's become one of the most contentious issues in our leadership race. One of the candidates has said, let's abolish it altogether, and most of the rest of the campaign field has said, let's keep it and never change it. I'm a little bit unique in my position on this. What I've said is this: the world changes. I come from a farm background. There were similar debates around grain, around oil transportation, something known as the crow rate. Not an exact parallel, but you don't have to worry about this. All the retired farmers in Saskatchewan and the Peace District and so forth know what I'm talking about. Okay? Here's the reality. It doesn't matter if it's me or one of those other candidates. There's going to be change in the system. Okay? Things always change. Life changes. We had a free trade agreement. The Americans are now demanding change on this. There has been changes and adjustments in the milk. And they break milk and so forth up into different categories. That's the reality. There's going to be change. So for the people who say the system is never changing, not happening. And particularly if you talk among the poultry producers, they understand that. Some of the bigger dairy farmers do too. Okay? For the people who say, let's just scrap it, you need to understand this one thing. These farmers pay for what's known as a quota. Okay? So you've got young 20-some-year-old farmers who may have put up $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 to buy a quota along with their farm. So they've sunk maybe $1.5 million in this. So you can't just take away this quota and say it's gone because they've gone to the bank, there's various other things. You'd be like stealing a few $100,000 from them. And these are people who ever had the quota by and large years ago. They've moved on, they've retired, etc. So to get rid of this is not going to be easy. Having said that, the world changes. So here's what I've proposed. We need to start doing a couple things. First of all, we need to develop a fully free enterprise wing to our industries, particularly orientated at export. You look at a lot of growing economies in places like Asia, there's a big demand for really, really safe food products of high quality. Income levels rise, people want, there's scandals in their own country. I'm getting some of the Chinese Canadians in the audience nodding, that's exactly right. Okay? Why don't we start to look at small segments and start to grow, call it the completely free enterprise side of our market. The other reality then is there's going to be evolution in how this system's going to work. And rather than fighting with the guys in the industry, let's talk about how it can gradually change. Because the younger farmers are having a hard time buying in, and the older guys know they're going to want out. So let's do it that way. So I'm trying to take a middle position, and here's the reality. Whoever wins this leadership race, my position is likely going to be the one that's going to be adopted. Because people on both sides are going to have to compromise with reality. And that's one thing that needs to be understood. This is not the dominant issue for all Canadians. We need to make some adjustments to it. It's going to happen. But we do not need to scare the farmers who are currently working out there. Rural Quebec needs to be looked after and made sure that their farmers can be successful, but we can do it through transitioning and working gradually and talking with people rather than just scrapping supply management and leaving people with absolutely no guarantee for their future income. Some of the audience.
Okay, so again, another email question from askbrad@bradtrostcampaign.com from Russ. Brad, I work in the oil sector, and I believe we make a high-quality product and a high-value product. Will you end the war on oil, gas, and coal?
Whoever was sending that one actually heard me say this. Yes, oil, gas, coal, all those things, they're not just good for Western Canada, they're not just good for Nova Scotia, they're good for Ontario. Because you know what? All across this country, we benefit from the fossil fuel industry. In places like Hamilton, they manufacture stuff for Fort McMurray. Alberta, they're having some problems economically now, but they have paid in billions and billions of dollars into equalization to help pay for healthcare in Atlantic Canada and all across the country. I know flying on airplanes over the years, I've seen a lot of people, Atlantic Canadians, going to work in Alberta for 2 weeks in, 2 weeks out. So, oil is good for Canada. Gas is good for Canada. It is an industry which has built our country. Coal helps Canada. That's how the Nova Scotia built its power, and Cape Breton and places like that, for many years their economy was founded. Look, technology is changing things. Interestingly enough, the growth in production in natural gas in North America has cut fossil fuel emissions greatly. They're the biggest thing, more than any environmental plan. So oil and gas is good for Canada. We got to have those pipelines built to take fuel down to the United States and sell it to them, and also to Asia. And it would be nice if we could have one across Canada, but that's for the private sector to decide. So let's go out there and make sure we have jobs for our fellow Canadians. Good, high-paying jobs.
Yes, and why not? A question from the room. We haven't done that in a while. Make sure you speak up.
I have a very brief question concerning the Conservative leadership race. How do you plan to win Quebec?
That's a very good question.
Am I allowed to say, you mean in this leadership race, or for the general election?
Race. How are you going to get enough votes in Quebec?
To be perfectly blunt, there's 13 candidates here. And so you're not just going to win with first ballot support. And Quebec is rural Quebec is probably one of my weaker areas. We were actually, what am I allowed to say on tactics?
Not too much.
Not too much. Okay, I'm not supposed to share my strategy to all those people watching on TV from the other campaigns who are taking little notes. But let's put it this way.
So let me rephrase the question in a way that's easier to answer. Francophones in Quebec, why should they support you?
Why should Francophones support me in Quebec? Look, for the record, I speak French. We have an interview, I think it's on our website, where I did half an hour, totally in French, interview with Quebec journalists. So for anyone who says, yeah, I have an accent, maybe my accent in French is better than Jean Chrétien's accent was in English. No ifs, ands, buts about that. So that's one thing. Number two, how do you win in Quebec? I know the strategist who was in charge of actually the best 2 campaigns we had in Quebec in the last 10 years. Interestingly, you know what he always strove to campaign on? And he advised the Quebec MPs, Bernier and others, and they actually listened. You run on families. Quebecers, people think they're different than the rest of the country because, you know, different language, politics, things like that. You run on, ma'am, you're walking right through the camera there. So you run on families, you run on grandparents, you run on parents. So the exact same themes for the general election, you go and you build on that. There's no if, and, buts, or maybes about that. You run on family because, and you tie it in, your economic policy to family, your social policy to family. Quebec is a big, everyone knows each other in some sense, so they feel they do because they're, you know, historically more tied in together. So that's how you do it for the general election. For this here, look, I understand there's other candidates who have hometown appeal in certain parts of the province. But here's the interesting thing. Those two candidates, who are both from Quebec, take very different approaches and are very polarized on issues. So their supporters are going to have a hard time swinging behind one or another. I've reached out. We've had meetings and stuff in places like Shefford. We are doing very well in parts of Montreal. Again, there's a lot of new Canadian voters there. So we're doing Quebec. Interestingly enough, there was a poll by one of the campaigns way back in November, not my campaign, and I was one of only 2 or 3 Anglophone candidates that was actually registering among Quebec Conservatives. And that was way back at the beginning of the race. So we have support in Quebec on the first ballot. One of the 2 Quebec candidates will drop off, and we are going to reach out to those supporters too. But if I talk too much, they're going to want me to get jerked off here. So
yeah, that's so I've got another Facebook question from Connie. I think your platform aligns with my own principles better than any other candidates, but I can't get past the fact that you stood and voted for Bill C-51. You'll need to explain what C-51 was. Your help in understanding that. I need your help in understanding that. I think the big fight for Christians in the coming years is going to be for freedom against big government and globalization. Can you please convince me that you will take those issues seriously and you won't sell us out if we trust you with this? We need more freedom, more privacy, less government intrusion in our lives. Before I cast my vote, I need to know where you stand. And that's Connie.
yeah, the end portion of that remarks there completely agree. We need more freedom. We need more privacy. We don't need big government, be it in the international sphere, the United Nations, or in Canada, to intrude more into our lives. C-51 was the Conservative government's anti-terrorist legislation. It was security legislation, and there were some questions about how aggressively it would intrude into people's lives. Now, what it actually said and so forth is debated. I and all the other Conservatives in the House of Commons, including all the other ones, we voted for it because we were trying to figure out a way to make Canadians safer from both domestic and overseas terrorism. Okay? I agree with the total sentiment in that question about we absolutely need to do things to protect Canadians' privacy. That's one of the reasons why I was unique. I was literally the only Conservative member of Parliament to vote for a Liberal opposition member's bill that called for a parliamentary oversight committee. Now, honestly, I think her bill, this was Joyce Murray, Liberal MP from Vancouver Quarter. I actually think her bill wasn't all that good in many ways, but she had one really good thing about it, that you would have democratic oversight and that you would have checks and balances for people from a variety, because we'd have judges trying to stop government overreach, we'd have parliamentarians trying to stop government overreach, so there would be 2 or 3 different mechanisms to try to grab each and every one of them to make sure the government doesn't invade people's privacies. Now, I was unique and the only Conservative because I did share some of those concerns about it. Now, the Liberals have brought back that proposal, but they've changed it so that you basically get, how should we say, the press release version of it without the substance of it. So we have sort of the nice shell of government parliamentary oversight, democratic oversight, without necessarily the reality of being able to go in there and stop big government's overreach. So the principles are there, but the details are not. So I sympathize with I think it was a lady who sent the email in, because we don't need more government in our lives. But it's a tough balance, because as someone who was involved in that shooting in Ottawa, I get a little nervous, and I still react when I hear doors slamming, and I think back to that day in Ottawa. So give me some grace on that one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brad. An email question. I'm Brad. I'm very concerned about the ramifications of the renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement. What would you propose that Canada's position should be on any renegotiated NAFTA?
Here's the thing, we don't have a choice. Any one of the 3 countries can unilaterally pull out on it. Now, the thing is, if they pull out on Canada unilaterally, in the case of Canada and the United States, we go back automatically to the Canada-US FTA, okay? here's the thing. American economy, particularly here in southern Ontario, with Michigan, Ohio, and a few other areas, their manufacturing is deeply integrated back and forth across the border. So the Americans cannot pull out. The other thing is this. The biggest thing the U.S. buys from us is energy. Okay? So we actually have some advantages in dealing with them. As a percentage of the economy, we need them more than they need us. But as far as options to buy goods elsewhere in the world, they need us more than we need them. And there's states like Ohio that have a big trade surplus with Canada. So, if the Americans want to renegotiate this, there's nothing we can do. Might even be a good thing. But when it happens, we have to remember we have as many cards to play as they do and more. So basic rules of negotiation, you don't look too eager. You try to let the other guy make the first move, and then you hold back and be very patient. And again, as I said to Donald Trump, who's watching there in the White House, we're not going to negotiate in public, but we're not going to play nice with you. You're a business partner. Friends we can be after negotiations are done. Our job is to negotiate a tough agreement for Canada, and a good agreement not just for Canadian exporters, but for Canadian consumers as well. Because here's the thing. Everything that comes into Canada or produced in Canada gets bought by people like you. And we want to make sure you have a good deal too. There's no point in protecting a Canadian industry if it causes a huge, huge tax to Canadians all across the board. So we'll negotiate hard, and we'll see where it goes. They want more from us in some respects at times than we want for them.
Okay, so, yeah. Oh, question. Make sure you speak up.
Hi, Brad. My question is related to refugee policy. Donald Trump says he's going to put U.S. people first. As Canadian, I really hope our government also put Canadian first. However, the current Prime Minister's refugee policy, we actually, as people like regular people like myself, we don't really feel safe, and we feel our money won't be well used. So I wonder what kind of refugee policy you're going to bring in. Thank you.
Very, very good question. Now, here's something to everyone here and to people back home. Do you know there's basically two categories of refugees coming to Canada? Did you know that? There's private sponsorship and there's government sponsorship. The private sponsorship idea dates way back to when the Vietnamese boat people came to Canada after the Vietnam War and stuff, and we brought them in. And what it does, and every MP's office is familiar with this, you get a group of 5 Canadians who are financially responsible for bringing in someone to Canada. Okay? It's a great idea. They come in, the government doesn't have to worry about this financially. The individuals, often church groups, they're overwhelmingly the majority who do this. Bring them in, they help the people to integrate, they looked after them financially. It's a great success. At the event here in Richmond Hills I was the other day, I ran into someone who said, that's exactly how I came into the country. And I talked with him, and I looked, and he had a Rolex watch on. I thought, hey, he's done pretty good. This refugee policy works. You know what? That has a better security screening, that has better integration, everything. And you know what? The Liberals have capped that this year at only 2,000 people. Okay? You know why they've done that? Because they want to concentrate on government-sponsored refugees, which costs the Canadian taxpayer a lot of money, which also has more difficulty for the poor people who are coming. They have a harder time linguistically, economically. They don't have the support networks. So I don't get this. Canadians, like the church I belong to, sponsors people from Eritrea. We did a family from Syria, etc. Why don't we just get rid of the limit on private sponsorships and do those instead of the government sponsorship? So I'll tell you why the Liberals like the government sponsorships, because the people who are brought in that way, they then owe their political allegiance to the government that brought them in. So in my viewpoint, that's what the Liberals are doing on the whole Syrian refugee thing. They're using these people as a political prop and trying to make them beholden to the Liberals in the future. Okay? Whereas under the Conservatives, there were different programs, and it was the whole concept of private sponsorship. So let's throw it open for private sponsorships, and let's get rid of the whole idea of government sponsorships. If we're going to help refugees, a lot more people get help by taking the same money and putting it into refugee camps overseas instead of trying to have the government pick people. Because when you do private refugee sponsorships, guess what? You get a much bigger spread across the world, Africa, Asia, all over the place. Instead, when you do the government system, you get sort of a block movement where the government then tries to get political preference from people later on. So, okay, maybe a couple more questions, Mike, because we're coming up to 8 o'clock here.
We've got so many people in the room. Yes, you will. Okay. People are watching at home. It's going to.
Hi, Dan.
Hi.
I'm Lisa.
Could you pull that right up to your mouth here, just
all
like.
the way from Etobicoke Lakeshore.
Okay.
And I have so many concerns, but I'll bring one to you now. If I vote for you.
Okay, put it to your mouth. If you vote for me.
If I vote for you to become the leader of my party.
Yes.
And then I vote for you to become the leader of my country.
Good. 2 for 2. I'm happy so far.
How is that going to benefit me when we have activist judges who are appointed, not elected, and they're making laws from the bench? They're striking down laws from the bench. How are you going to deal with that? What can we do about that?
That is an excellent question. So first of all, let me say, I am very sad that you have a Liberal Member of Parliament now. Your previous Member of Parliament, Stella Ambler, was one of the best people we had in the House of Commons. And if Stephen Harper's watching, you made a mistake by not putting her in cabinet, and you know it. So, you had an outstanding Member of Parliament who I hope comes back. In your question about what can we do on activist judges, there's a little something in the Constitution known as the notwithstanding clause. This is how we use it. The judges pass, the Parliament of Canada passes some bill. Whatever it is, it takes care of a problem. These activist judges decide, they don't really like it. So what if the people voted for these guys and you know, it passed through the House of Commons after a lot of debate and research? So they strike it down and they say the Charter of Rights says this and this. Back when the Constitution was repatriated in 1982, some very intelligent Canadian premiers, mostly conservatives, but it included New Democrat Alan Blakeney from Saskatchewan, said, no, we need to put something in there to preserve British parliamentary tradition of the supremacy of the House of Commons. And they called it the notwithstanding clause. So, when the activist Liberal judges strike down some good legislation, the Parliament of Canada can then put together a piece of legislation that says, notwithstanding, and basically it's a reference then to the judge's decision, so notwithstanding to this Liberal activist judge's decision, we, the Parliament of Canada, reaffirm the legislation that we previously passed. And it's good and implemented for a period of 5 years, and then the House of Commons would have to pass it again. So what that does then is it actually permits Parliament to reassert its authority. But here's been the problem. Most politicians are either too lazy or too chicken to use it. In this campaign here, whenever we've explained it to people across the country, they go, why don't we do it? Okay? It's been done a few times. In Quebec, they do it all the time with language issue. But myself and one other candidate, Stephen Blaney from Quebec, were the only two people who have consistently said, if you think a piece of legislation is moral and right for the country the first time you pass it, why would you let someone else decide if it is? You take it to the people. It's fundamentally a question of democracy. Canadians are good and moral people. If you pass a piece of legislation that they think is immoral, they will vote against you, they will let you know, they will defeat it. So, the way you beat these activist judges, you pass the same bill with the notwithstanding clause attached. Does that help? Okay.
And thank you for the patience of everybody online. I was getting a number of messages that there was some bad reverb, and hopefully we've got that sorted out. We can just do one more question, and I can get you to a wrap up. Tell everyone here we'll answer questions after. Yeah, for sure. We've got all the time in the world after the broadcast to answer additional questions from the room, so we're happy to do that. But Joe had a question, and I'm just paraphrasing now. He's a 30-year vet of the military who just retired. He wants to know your position on the military about going forward, not just on equipping the military properly, but also on missions, how missions should be decided as well.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And to some degree, that's more of a foreign policy question than a defense question. It's how do you, on a foreign policy level, decide what missions to engage your military on? The basic first principle is what is in Canada's interest, okay? You do not use the military as a prop to try to get yourself a seat on the United Nations. You first ask yourself, what is in Canada's interests? Is it fighting terrorism that could come later on to Canada? That was the argument often helping with Afghanistan. Sometimes our American friends, who we really depend on for help, ask us, and then we can get involved in a limited way because, again, we need them to defend our country against things like North Korean missiles and so forth. So, missions that are clear-cut, that have an end time, that have a specific goal, those very much go up on the priority list. Missions that are more UN-sponsored, political, no clear end line, meddling, or for political grandstanding, those fall way down the decision as far as sending Canadian troops and forces overseas. So what is the Canadian strategic interest? Even if there's a Canadian moral interest, is there a plan or something that we can achieve and with a timeline to get out and do it properly? Our Canadian forces, very professional, very well trained, often under-equipped, but they need to have a clear mandate, they need to have clear directions if they're going to do any sort of international operations. Fighting terrorism, that makes sense to me. Getting involved in a local conflict that has no end in sight and that there's no clear plan or no clear entry-exit strategy, that to me doesn't make sense. And that's one of the things I think we need to be careful of.
That's great. Thank you for that. And I'm getting a lot of mocking from the technical guys because even though I know better, and you're doing a great job of keeping the microphone up, I'm talking and doing like this and just, I'm sure I'm fading in and out, and I apologize for that. So our time is just about up. We'll get you to make some closing statements. We have a few housekeeping items once you're done. So if you want to just wrap things up and give your final campaign pitch to the folks here in the room and the folks online.
As I said earlier when I started this broadcast, my name's Brad Trost. A lot of people who are voting for me, who signed up for me in this campaign, signed up because they know I'm a principled politician. I've kept my word. People who have known me 12 years ago when I first got elected got involved in this campaign because, as one of the ladies said, Brad, you haven't changed. You stick to what you promise. For those of you who don't know me, I hope this was a good introduction. You need to see that I'm prepared to deal with a large number of issues: economic, fiscal, foreign policy, and of course, social policy as well. My goal is to work for all Canadians, to work for all Conservatives. If you watched the debate last night, you know that I talked about the importance of team, that I reached out to definitively say there's things I appreciate about other candidates. This is one thing. I need your vote. I need your support. I am a Conservative candidate through and through who wants to keep the Conservative Party conservative, who doesn't want to change it into something that's unrecognizable. The basic philosophy of what we had over the last 10 years was good. There's things that need to be changed. The party's approach needs to be more democratic, more reaching out to people that weren't necessarily listened to in the last campaign. We need to stand for our principles, though. We do not need to compromise with the Liberals. I ask for your first ballot support, but I do understand some of you have strong attachments to other candidates. So you need to think about where to put me on your ballot. I need, for those of you who are strongly attached to someone else, to put me as number 2 or even possibly number 3. Why? Because we are a Conservative team, and I need your support to bring a strong, principled, 100% Conservative leadership to this party and to the country. In 2019, we are going to beat Justin Trudeau. I want to lead that team. I want to beat him in Western Canada, where he's raising taxes to destroy the oil industry and coal mining. I want to go after him in Atlantic Canada, which his Liberal government continuously ignores and takes for granted. I want to reach out to the new Canadian voters, those social conservatives who have often been ignored or taken for granted by everyone. If you want to build a broad coalition, you need to reach out to voters all over the country. That's what I'm trying to do. Socially, fiscally, and democratically conservative Brad Trost. 100% conservative. I ask for your vote. I ask for your support. Thank you, and God bless.
Now, wouldn't it be great to have a leader of the Conservative Party of Canada who is willing to take questions from grassroots conservatives and Canadians across the country? Wouldn't that be great? I've got a couple things I want to tell you about. First of all, if you want some information on how to vote by mail, if you send an email to vote@bradtrostcampaign.com. That's VOTE@bradtrostcampaign, vote@bradtrostcampaign.com. Also, if you really feel like Brad is touching upon some of your concerns, we want to make sure that you have an opportunity to support Brad in his campaign. The campaign is continuing through May 27th. That's when we'll learn the outcome of the voting by mail-in ballot. And so I guess I need to put this a little closer to my mouth. So is that a little better? So if you would go to bradforleader.ca, that's bradforleader.ca, and up in the top right-hand corner, there's a red button that says Donate. Click on the Donate button, and that will take you to a page that gives you a choice of donating either by check or by credit card. And there's links there that you can click on. You can click on the link for donating by check, and that'll take you to a form to download and fill out and then mail in. Or you can click on the Donate by credit card, and that'll take you to an online donation site with your credit card. And you can take care of that. It's a secure donation online site. So just to reiterate, if you want more information about voting, filling out your ballot, go to email vote@bradtrostcampaign.com. And for those of you who might be concerned about whether you're donating, if you've reached your maximum donation limit, I know that's not true for everybody. Any donation is much appreciated. But your donation limit for 2017 to a leadership campaign, all right, is $1,550. Even if you've donated to the Conservative Party of Canada, if you've donated to your local EDA, your local electoral district association, you can still donate up to $1,550 in calendar year 2017. That's bradforleader.ca. Click on the Donate button. Well, thank you so much for coming tonight. And for those of us who are here, there's some donuts back there and some coffee, I hear. Okay. And sorry, folks at home, you'll have to take us up on it another time. And so thanks for coming tonight. And I think my friend Mike has some words to wrap up.
Just thank you, Russ, for that. Just a few quick words to wrap up the broadcast. We will be posting the pre-recorded this broadcast at a later date. So if you missed it, if one of your friends missed it, we will be posting that up. I'll tweet that out where and when you can find it. So that'll be helpful. Also, we'll be taking questions in the room. And I wanted to thank people in the audience for reminding me about the microphone. I wanted to thank Brad for all he's done. This has been a long campaign. This has been really hard on him, and I wanted to take the opportunity to really thank him for all his hard work, and thank you folks at home for being patient and watching the broadcast. Thanks very much.
We'll do more question